What are some of the examples of things that you have gotten from being a part of this community?
Everything. I remember going to San Francisco, like I said, in 2015, and you kind of hear about all these things, San Francisco, startup world. Everybody in my community, I think I've mostly met through startups. And we have helped each other with consulting opportunities, advisory roles, helping other businesses, all the way through 3PL, RFPs, and recommendations, and job hiring. And it's like the number one place I go to today. And people that work for me on my team, I think, sometimes like, hey, can you ask your community? Or an issue arises easy, I can just post something quickly to Slack and possibly in that meeting get an answer to something that might be going on. So.
Welcome to Blue Ocean by StartOps. Each episode, I sit down with leaders in consumer brand supply chain, finance, and CX to talk about the problems they're facing and the solutions they're using or building. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, everyone. My name is Charles Cushing. I'm the founder of StartOps. With me here today is Keith Frymark, the SVP of Supply Chain and Quality at Seed Health, and also my co-founder of this community. Welcome, Keith.
Hey, thanks for having me, Charles. Excited to be here.
So it's going to be a fun episode today. We're going to go get in a time machine and go back and talk a little bit about the beginnings of StartOps to the best that we can recall them, and also a little bit about, what the group is today and where we think it's going. So excited to kick that off. Maybe just to get started, why don't we both do a little bit of an intro and we can go from there. So yeah, you want to just share a bit about like what's your background and take it from there.
Absolutely, Charles. We have similar backgrounds. I actually lived in China for 3 years, and that's really where my passion for supply chain started. I had an opportunity to study abroad in college and went all over the country. And then when I graduated, I thought, hey, I should move back. I'm in business. This is like kind of the height after 2008 Olympics, right? Everyone was looking at China. So we were distributing Stella Artois, Hoegaarden, all of AB InBev's global beer brands in mainland China, as well as like Toblerone chocolate under Kraft Foods. And so it was the first opportunity where I really saw goods moving from point A to point B, got to understand the ins and outs of customs, a little bit of bribery going on to clear goods. And then I thought, yeah, why don't I just move back to the United States, live in the US, travel to China for business, and had a really good opportunity to work for several like really cool brands and did a lot of contract manufacturing, import logistics, warehousing, distribution, quality control. And over the last, 12 to 13 years, have really just made a big impact in that field of supply chain, and very fortunate to really work in like all facets. As I mentioned, pretty broad experience and super excited for what I'm doing at Seed Health, which we can maybe dive into in a little bit. But yeah, that's my background.
Where were you based in China again? And where did you learn Chinese?
I was based in Beijing, and we had an office in Shanghai. And just like throughout, that experience, I traveled all over. I've been to more cities in China than I have in the United States. Yeah. So I learned Mandarin in Beijing, did an intensive language program there. And yeah, really like when I started working for this company, I had to sell stuff in Mandarin. Like I would sit down and have business meetings, and Google Translate was very helpful at the time. Just kind of forced myself to figure it out and became pretty proficient. I don't really speak it anymore, but I remember a sourcing trip with a previous company I worked for, and we spent 3 weeks going across China, trains, planes, automobiles, and I was translating. I was like, well, what's going on? I can't believe I'm able to do this, but not so much anymore. But at one point I was pretty good.
It goes quickly. Yeah, I had about 5 years there where I was like, yeah, I'm definitely going to pick this back up and keep my fluency. And then at some point, it was just like, well, guess I'm not going back. So time to let this go.
Tell me about your background and how you got started and all this.
Yeah. So I guess, as you were saying, similarly, was really interested in China was the thing to do, I guess, at that time. So studied intensive Chinese in school, went back actually in finance to work there post-grad, but then pretty quickly becoming the COO of the company. And it was a re-commerce company. So we were buying secondhand women's fashion, clothes, handbags, shoes. And we had our own proprietary sort of refurbishment and listing process, which we ran through a 30,000 square foot warehouse in San Francisco. And we custom rolled our own kind of like WMS to run that workflow. And I ran that team. And man, I was just in so far over my head. I'm sure as you felt many times in your early career, but I was like running a 200 person org as like a 25 to 26-year-old, and made a lot of, what I now see as avoidable mistakes, which we can kind of come back to. But like it really, in many ways, was sort of the seed of startups. Then that company got acquired to power eBay's assisted selling offering, joined eBay, realized I was not cut out for the corporate world and pretty quickly broke off with the CTO of Twice. And we started a logistics SaaS company called Galleon. It was also acquired successfully, and then did a stint most recently for 2 years running the founders program, like idea stage founder community called On Deck. So that's in my journey so far.
Amazing. Yeah. And Galleon is how you and I actually got connected and kind of the impetus for startups, which is pretty exciting.
Let me actually quiz you. Do you remember anything about our first meeting or how we met?
I do. Yeah. So shout out to Faisal Al-Khalidi, who was running growth marketing at Soma Water when I was there in 2016. I want to say I moved to San Francisco in 2015 to work with Soma Water and, got involved in the startup world there. And Faisal introduced me to Calvin, who was your partner in Galleon there. And he said, hey, you got to meet Keith. You guys were looking for an operations person to kind of understand what problems I was dealing with on a day-to-day basis and kind of share some insights that could build this platform that you all were building. And we got introduced over email, met at Elite Coffee for the first time. And the rest is history, but it was a good opportunity to meet some people in that community and really just kind of kickstart all of this networking opportunity and learning about amazing companies that people were building in the space that I was working in.
Think about like the first, year or two of the group. I mean, it was us sort of keeping in touch over email. We met up a couple more times, and then we started organizing some events, right? I think we did like a drinks at a bar in Soma, and we invited a bunch of operators. I think we did a couple dinners, and we brought some other people along.
Yeah, it was interesting. I remember you introduced me to Marshall, who was running logistics operations over at Flexport. He and I hit it off right away. A colleague of mine actually at Soma too, Leslie Wells, who's in the group, she introduced me to Nancy Spector. There, she had a consulting opportunity. I was consulting at the time, and you and Nancy knew each other. And then, just kind of like all of us came together. And I remember that first meetup, I think there was probably like 5 or 6 of us at that bar in Soma. Yeah, something like that. And, fast forward to today, we have 180 something people in this group. So it's come a long way since then.
It is funny how these things always start almost as like a collapsing of a bunch of like individual relationships where I guess I'd met a bunch of people and you'd met a bunch of people. And, at some point we were like, well, these people should all know each other. And then even though we were really calling it startups at the time, I think that was effectively like the inception of the group.
Yes, absolutely. Charles, how would you define the chapters of the group's life? Seems like started with beers and then kind of evolved from there.
Yeah. So definitely chapter 1 was definitely like beers and SF and just kind of getting, these original sort of core group members together. At some point, I think I realized, I can't remember if it was before or after the pandemic started, but at some point, I think it was actually shortly before the pandemic started. We're like, okay, this is just people in SF, but like, how are we going to keep in touch? We didn't have WhatsApp. I'd heard the advice somewhere that like, you should try to, host your community where people are at already. And so it's like, well, everyone's on LinkedIn. So why don't we like make a private LinkedIn group and try to get some conversation going there? It did not work. I will put it very bluntly. People were on LinkedIn all the time, but I think the group's feature there was just not the right forum for people to be sort of asking questions. The point of putting the group online, I think very much was around this idea of asking questions. Keith, you and I, our whole correspondence for the first like year or two of knowing each other, I think it really was just around like, hey, I need a new ERP. Like, what should I look at? Hey, I'm looking for this type of person to talk to. Who should I talk to? And so I think that's really what I was looking for, was like a venue for questions. So we did a brief and ill-fated period on LinkedIn. And then at some point, we're like, okay, this isn't working. Like, let's try Slack. And that was a huge turning point because suddenly everyone was talking. And this is old news at this point. Everyone knows about Slack communities, but it wasn't really quite such a done thing. At the time, it was just starting to become that. And the timing was really good because not too long after that, COVID hit and every supply chain operator just like needed people to talk to. And so that was also really, I'd say, where the group's organic growth really kicked off. Like everyone who was in the group started to invite other people and those people invited other people. And it was still like a really good size where everyone could kind of get to know each other one-on-one and exchange a lot of value. And I sort of think of it as like exploring the scaling of like trust within a community. And then to some extent, the chapter we're currently in, the only other sort of dividing marker I'd put in is less than a year ago, I left my role at On Deck and I turned to this group and started managing it full time. And from my perspective, there's been a big change in terms of like how much I've been paying attention and the types of value I've been trying to build there. But that's what I'd say are the chapters.
Yeah, and what a blessing it was for you to join full time. You're right, absolutely. During COVID, I think it was kind of a blessing of people understanding what supply chain actually did and how complicated it was. Selfishly, I feel like people like, oh, I actually understand what you do. And all of us at the same time are like, hey, how much are you paying for a container out of China? We need to air freight something urgently. What provider are you using? And yeah, the community really came together. You and I were working full time. We had kids and, we had talked about these ideas of expanding the group more and more, but, life prevailed. And now with you full time at the helm, I think this group has really just skyrocketed and a lot of amazing things are happening. So the future looks bright.
Thanks, man. You've been an active operator the entire time the group has existed. For someone who doesn't know about the group, what are some of the examples of things that you have gotten from being a part of this community?
Everything. I remember going to San Francisco, like I said, in 2015, and you kind of hear about all these things, San Francisco, startup world, and this kind of special place. And I got there and I had this background in China, and I was really passionate about what I did. And I was dealing with these issues, trying to help startups, but I didn't really know who to talk to. I did kind of feel alone. And, there's a lot of growth marketing and stuff going on and all these meetups. I'm like, where are the operations community? And luckily you and I found each other. And, I was actually reviewing some emails going back in our history. And like you said, I was throwing ERPs, hey, have you heard about this? And you introduced me to a couple people, Marshall, we talked about. And that's really just actually the playbook for startups and how it kind of naturally unfolded. And now today, everybody in my community, I think I've mostly met through startups. And we have helped each other with consulting opportunities, advisory roles, helping other businesses, all the way through 3PL, RFPs and recommendations and job hiring. And it's the number one place I go to today. And people that work for me on my team, I think, sometimes like, hey, can you ask your community? Or an issue arises, it's easy. I can just post something quickly to Slack and possibly in that meeting get an answer to something that might be going on. So yeah, I credit everything to startups and would highly encourage people that are in a similar situation, looking to solve problems or just talking to another operations expert. You get a lot of value from the group.
The most active channel, far and away is our Asks channel. Funny side anecdote, 90+% of the group has come in through referral. Yeah, we know this because when people apply to the group, we have a field which says, did anyone recommend you? And yeah, I'd say almost without exception, someone has heard of us through someone. We haven't done any, external marketing for the community, but one person, it was Lloyd actually, came in through the group because he Googled startups thinking that it would be really great if there were an operator community called startups, and he found us that way. So pretty funny, idiosyncratic way to stumble across the group.
That is so funny. I did not know that about Lloyd. And fun fact, I actually worked pretty closely with Lloyd for a while he was at Public Goods, and he and I would meet weekly and jam on supply chain, team structuring, RFPs, contracts, pricing. I did not know that's how we got to the group. That's funny.
Yeah, I know. We were very lucky that he decided to do that search.
All right, so here we are today. We met in 2016, it's 2024, which is crazy to think about. What's the vision for the group, right? It started in LinkedIn, it's in Slack. We had some meetups early days. Where do you see this group going?
I think the thing that got me to sort of make the leap to wanting to run this group full time was, I came out of this role at On Deck and I almost did started paying more attention to it. I almost did a double take when I saw how much the group had grown. It kind of crept up on me, it went from 10 people to 30 people to 80 people to, as you said, I think actually maybe north of 200 today. It's continued to tick up probably since I last shared that stat. There's definitely a need here. We're not the only operator community, in town anymore, and different ones have different focuses. But I think as a sort of sacred, vendor-free, highly curated space for senior operations leaders to be able to get, opinion, I think we're still pretty much the only one that has all those criteria. And it's crazy how valuable it is for all the reasons we talked about, people making 5, 6, 7-figure decisions based on, at least in part, the advice they're getting through this group. What I have learned though is a couple things. One is that groups like this tend to get worse as they scale. And so I wanted to start working on some ways to basically make sure that we could maintain intimacy and trust as we scale. And that's going to take the form of some software. And we can talk more about that as it gets closer to being ready. The second thing that was going to be really core to what we're doing is just trying to take all this knowledge that's being shared and turning it into resources that are available, not just, to the community, certainly to the community, but also beyond the community. I mean, there's just hundreds of years of hard-learned supply chain lessons that exist in the brains of the people in this group. And one, operators do not typically get a platform. It's changing to some extent, but like there have not historically been a lot of opportunities for operators to share with other operators and boost their own sort of personal brand and also just like share their wisdom with their peers. And so we're trying to create a platform around that and have been doing a lot more media type stuff there. And also just like organizing the information and making it like searchable and discoverable. There's no Wikipedia for supply chain today. And we're starting to work on some stuff around that, just trying to take the wisdom of this group and make it more broadly available. So I'd say those are the kind of major themes of what we're working on. And yeah, got a lot of stuff cooking. We've been running a ton of experiments this year, seeing, what sticks, what doesn't, and excited to share more as we go forward. The other bucket that we have started to dabble in is job seeking. There's a huge amount of demand for people to find fractional roles right now, which we're really excited about. As a brand, it's still just like really hard to find good qualified operators who have the specific subset of skills that you need, because every supply chain is so unique and it's really not obvious like 90+% of the time just from someone's LinkedIn, whether they have worked with the tools or services or types of problems that, you need for your company. And so, yeah, also doing some work to try to expose more of that.
Yeah, I love what you said about as you scale the intimacy, the group, like what made us special. We have to keep that. And I think we've done a really good job at making sure, our brand guidelines and, ethos of who joins the group stays intact. And, we have a really good job with the admissions committee there, making sure the right people get in the group. One of the things I'm always surprised about is when I talk about this with vendors, where I was like, ooh, how do we get involved? Like, well, right now we actually don't allow vendors in because we don't want people, getting sales pitches while they're on Slack. But you've done a lot of interesting work on the vendor side of startups. Do you care to share about any of that and what that vision looks like?
Yeah, so we've always been at this sort of impasse, very much sort of dictated by the limitations of Slack, where on the one hand, I firmly do believe that vendors have a lot to add to the ecosystem. I mean, a lot of people who go and build supply chain tools are former operators themselves. And in many ways, they're actually better qualified to speak to a specific problem than maybe an operator because, they've seen it 50, 60, 100, 1,000 times because it's like the one thing they built a tool to solve that problem. They're going to see how every one of their customers is handling it. So that's been really interesting. And actually, one thing I've been doing recently is talking to members about like, hey, like who is your network today? Who is your trusted network? When your back's against the wall, like who do you call? And the three answers always are: one, the startups community; two, my past boss / colleagues who I built a good relationship with; and three is like, I've got a handful of vendors who I just like, we've known each other forever. I take them from company to company. I trust them. I know they're going to do me right in a crisis. And so that's like a really good indicator that like there is value. But you can't just let vendors into Slack because even if they're the absolute best people in the world, and we know a lot of these other, Matt Hertz is like a wonderful, helpful person who is never going to like try to get you to do anything that is not the best thing for your brand. But not everyone knows that. And so the moment you open the door to like, hey, who's this mysterious person? Oh, it's a vendor. If there's not an existing line of trust there, it creates the almost like illusion that you can't trust the group. And so people immediately then can't share the questions that are most important to them. That's our current thinking on it. And again, it's kind of core to what we're trying to build, with some sort of software products in the future.
Yeah, I think it gets harder too, right? If there's so many people in the group now, then they get the impression they can invite a vendor and, we don't know everybody and it can get sticky pretty quickly. But shout out to Matt Hertz. He's certainly a legend in the space.
And it's not just Matt. There are a lot of great folks out there. He's just the one who first came to mind. What are you excited about for the future of the group, as an active operator?
This community is so small. Like I've started to realize just how many people I've been connected with over the years now in the community that like we all kind of know each other, which is really great. I mean, it's so fun to work with amazing, brilliant people. And I think a lot of times, this has been my experience personally, but like supply chain is about connections. We talk about tools, we talk about AI. But as you mentioned, it's like the first people I go to is people in startups. I'm talking to a lot of people in the group that I have a lot of respect for, and they're giving me vendor recommendations. And then I build a relationship with those vendors, and I might leave and go to another company, and now I have that relationship. And so, just continuing to expand the community and continue to get introduced to new people who are building some exciting things at their organizations and sharing some amazing advice.
That's a great framing on it. And actually maybe like sort of an inverse way of saying that question is like, what could we be doing better? I think like events is something we've historically not been great at because it wasn't part of the DNA in the beginning because it was COVID. So that's something we're trying to ramp up on. And Keith, you've been doing an amazing job starting to sort of pioneer that. I think, creating small private spaces for operators to exchange information in a way that's off the record, basically, is very valuable. We want to ramp that up. Helping members get together IRL at events, whether it's something that we host or something we co-host or it's at a conference that everyone's going to, is also kind of part of the hope. And just generally, it's a small space, but then everyone's kind of 1 degree of separation for everyone else, but that doesn't necessarily equate to trust. And so it's like, how do you actually strengthen the bonds between people as well, beyond just that initial connection? Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. Keith, thank you so much for joining. Really fun to take a little trip down memory lane here and recount the beginning of the group. Excited to have you be a part of the future.
Yeah, I'm so glad we got to do this together. It's been really fun just looking back over the past, and have really enjoyed getting to know you. Have a lot of respect for what you've built in your past career and the community that we've built together over the years. So it's been fun, and hopefully some people see this and join the group.
All right. Thanks, Keith. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And we'll drop a link to the StartOps application if you're interested in the show notes. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Blue Ocean. Blue Ocean is produced by StartOps, a growing collection of resources for operations leaders at e-commerce brands. A few of the things we've built include a growing, vendor-free Slack community for operators to ask their most important questions and get answers from trusted peers, a job board that curates jobs from 1,500 modern brands, a media hub that includes this podcast, as well as articles and templates on a variety of operations topics, and a comprehensive directory of the software and services used by our community members. If you want to learn more, head to startops.network. And to keep up with the latest information from StartOps, or catch the most recent episodes of Blue Ocean, follow the StartOps page on LinkedIn or subscribe to our newsletter. Thanks for listening, and hope to catch you next episode.